When you think of some of the longest athletic suspensions in recent history, surely the athlete had to commit a crime, such as something like domestic violence or sexual battery, right? Wrong. Some of the major four sports leagues in the United States have had some very talented players who do very bad things or commit crimes. There is no way someone should be suspended for multiple years for smoking marijuana when someone who commits an act of domestic violence or so only gets 6 games. After having written an online encyclopedia entry titled, "Is Marijuana a Performance-Enhancing Drug?" from an unknown author written in 2021, a newspaper article titled, "The Olympics Shouldn't Test for Cannabis, Much Less Ban Their Athletes for ... from Robin Abkarian, written in 2021 as well, and a YouTube video titled, "Calvin Johnson, I Smoked Weed Every Week in the NFL," from Grant Bessinger in 2021 as well. And many other scholarly sources, I have become much more knowledgeable on the effects of marijuana in an athlete's performance. Today I will first elaborate on the problem with many sport leagues and institutions within the U.S. that has marijuana on the list of banned substances when it's not a performance enhancer, which calls for a need to be fixed. Secondly, I will elaborate on my plan to remove marijuana from the list of banned substances as it is not a performance enhancer. Lastly, I would like you to visualize how removing marijuana from the list of banned substances would not only benefit the players within recovery, but benefit us as fans who, when we travel out to go see a game or so, we would have our favorite players sitting out less because of injuries and just the rest. Let me first discuss how institutions have wrongfully cracked down on athletes who have used marijuana. The problem with many sports institutions and leagues within the U.S. is that marijuana falls in the banned substance category. Many athletes have admitted to using marijuana even when it was illegal, which has led to some leagues becoming much more lenient, but the NFL has not budged. According to a newspaper article written from Jared Bell titled, "Will NFL Budge on Pot?" from 2016, the NFL is too worried about their public image rather than their athlete getting proper recovery, not proper, but being able to recover, and they don't want their players having the reputation of becoming potheads. Although many retired athletes speak on the subject about always using it for playing for recovery, these institutions are only worried about public image. Some athletes have received year-long suspensions and sometimes even longer for using marijuana. According to an article written by Vincent Frank, titled "Josh Gordon's Suspension is about a lot more than football." After young standout receiver Josh Gordon led the league in receiving yards in 2013, he only played 33 games in 6 seasons since that year. Football is a very physical sport, and just one game can have players extremely sore and bruised up, leading to many players like Josh Gordon turning to marijuana for recovery. Gordon, after an amazing second year in the league, has faced many suspensions, some reaching up to a year, and they just completely derailed his career. What could have been a superstar or an all-time great just fell off the face of the earth just because of suspensions due to marijuana. There is possibly an example of favoritism. In a YouTube video posted by Grant Bessinger titled, "Calvin Johnson, I Smoked Weed Every Week in the NFL," an all-time great receiver who was in the league at around the same time as Josh Gordon, he was never suspended. Calvin Johnson was an absolute freak of nature. He was one of the greatest of all time, and nobody can bring him down. In order to bring him down, they would have to go for his knees, which is very dangerous and cause injuries. And it cut his career short. He turned to marijuana just for recovery because he was going through it every year. He was always injured. As he explains in the video, he turned to marijuana to recover because his body was beat down every game just in order for players to stop him, and they still couldn't do that. But Johnson, he was never hit with a suspension. It doesn't make sense for Josh Gordon to be suspended for years, but Johnson never get one. Marijuana is not even a performance-enhancing drug. In a New York Times article written by Anahad O'Connor, Dr. Michael J. Joyner is quoted saying, "If you look at any list, any test of physical performance, there's no data. It's washed." Or marijuana makes it worse. If there is no evidence for marijuana to be a performance enhancer, there is no reason it should be on the list of performance enhancers and be a banned substance. Now that I've discussed the problem how institutions have wrongfully cracked down on athletes, and the problem with marijuana being on the list of banned substances, I will now introduce my plan to remove it from the list of banned substances and allow players to be able to use it during season, but not during games. Keeping performance-enhancing drugs out of sports is what keeps the game honest. It's what keeps the game real. Anybody who uses performance-enhancing drugs should be hit with suspension, at least a year. But marijuana is not a performance enhancer. A sports season is very long and grueling, and in many sports there's maybe 1 day break or none at all. In a YouTube video posted by Culture Game titled "Kevin Durant Talks Cannabis in the NBA," Durant compares marijuana to having a drink after a game to cool off. In the NBA season, there's 82 games long, and many games are back-to-back, and players don't have a rest. People will use marijuana as they would use like a glass of wine to cool off, to recover after a hard game. And the NBA has removed marijuana from the list of banned substances because many players use it for recovery, and there's no evidence of performance enhancement. All leagues should take out the NBA and remove marijuana from the list of banned substances, as it may be necessary for athletes in terms of recovery when there is not enough time. And marijuana could just help with getting a good night's sleep. According to a website titled "Where It Stands: Weed in U.S. Sports Leagues," both MLB and NHL are working towards removing marijuana from the list of banned substances, as it is now treated as the same as alcohol. It will not be used for practices, meetings, or games. But other than that, it is okay. In both the MLB and the NHL, teams play multiple games a week. And if you are a top player, you are not getting as much rest as some of the players who are just role players. So, if your body's going to be worn down and beat to shreds. Some players will turn to marijuana because that's their one way to recover. It helps them get good sleep and helps them feel better from an injury. Shift focus to real performance enhancers, which have historically made some athletes have been able to get away with. Many MLB greats there's been suspicion or have they admitted using performance enhancers. According to a newspaper article written by Brent Schrotenberg, the NFL has had 258 performance-enhancing drug-related suspensions since 2001, but no big deal. There have been around at least 82 cases in the last 5 years, showing steroid use is a problem, not marijuana. MLB has had history of PED suspicions, as many people know that Barry Bonds has been kept out of the Hall of Fame voting just because of steroid suspension. He was one of the most home runs, hit some of the most home runs of all time, but because of steroid suspicion, he's out of the Hall of Fame. After leagues remove marijuana from the list of banned substances, they can shift their focuses. Marijuana is not as big as a problem as other things going on with athletes. According to a sports article written by Allison McCann, titled "The NFL's Uneven History with Domestic Violence," McCann mentions suspicions for cheating on a drug test, suspensions for cheating on a drug test being larger than the suspension that Ray Rice got for beating his girlfriend. That just makes no sense. NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell is quoted saying, "It has to be consistent with other cases," and it was consistent with other cases. If a 2-game suspension is what the commissioner of the NFL believes is appropriate for a violent act, his priorities are backwards. This year in the NFL, there was an incident with a team doctor clearing Tua Tagovailoa, Dolphins quarterback, to go back into the game after clearly suffering a concussion. And in a game just 4 days later, he suffered another one, and it was one of the most scary things we've seen all year. He blacked out and immediately started seizing, and he was out for at least a month. He needs time to properly recover. Team doctors are not always 100% correct with recovery methods, and if marijuana helps athletes recover after playing a dangerous game, they should be able to use it. Everyone makes mistakes. True performance-enhancing drugs should always be banned from sports, but marijuana is not one of those drugs. So far, I have first covered how institutions wrongfully add marijuana on the list of banned substances, and secondly, my plan to remove marijuana from the list of banned substances and allowing athletes to use it during season but not during games. It brings me to my final point, and how I will help you visualize how removing marijuana from the list of banned substances would benefit not only athletes, but us as fans as well. Marijuana has been proven to help athletes recover from injuries. Removing marijuana from the banned substances list will benefit everyone else. Athletes do not want to miss games because of injuries. And there's no worse feeling as a fan who has traveled, let's say 100 miles or more to go see a game, just for your favorite athlete to be sitting out because of an injury or because of rest. Removing marijuana from the banned substances list would help save careers. Take Josh Gordon for the example. His career was derailed from suspensions for marijuana. Imagine if your favorite athlete would have developed an addiction, derailing their career. People make mistakes. It is possible for people to consume marijuana without even realizing. Leaving it on the banned substances list leaves no room for human error, and the slight mishap could ruin everything. Athletes are human too. Athletes cannot always be expected to be the perfect role model, and perform at the highest level every day. It's unrealistic. Athletes need to be able to live their lives. In conclusion, I have gone over how marijuana needs to be removed from the list of banned substances. Secondly, my plan to remove it for the list of banned substances. And lastly, how removing marijuana from the list of banned substances, how I will help you visualize how it'll help everyone, not just the players. I challenge you to think of an athlete who you think's suspension did not match the crime. I encourage you to help do anything you can. You can help these athletes. You can write to the people who run the institution, as such as the commissioner. You can be outspoken with your support for those who have suffered from these suspensions wrongfully. And you can rally with me to show support for these players. Professional sports are a source of entertainment, but athletes are people too. If we allow them to live their lives and not restrict them from recovery methods, they could be even greater on the field.